It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house there was the sound of telegraphic buzzing. We owe a great many things to the Victorians, not least our festive customs. According to tradition, the Christmas tree was introduced to Britain by Prince Albert, but the Victorians also gave us telegraphy and the beginnings of electric communications. So, in this video, let's take a festive snapshot of the telegraphically connected world of 1872. So, what was happening in 1872? Well, in this year, the Mary Celeste was found mysteriously abandoned. The British Challenger expedition departed from Portsmouth on its 4-year mission, which would lay the foundations of oceanography. The Australian Overland Telegraph Line was completed in this year. Rangers Football Club was founded in Glasgow. The first ever final of the FA Cup was played in March of this year. Wanderers FC won 1-0 against Royal Engineers AFC, in case you were interested. And in the United States, Yellowstone National Park was established as a national park. But with the run-up to Christmas, festive news from all around the world began to arrive in London, buzzed electrically via the network of telegraphic submarine cables and landlines. Here are just a few of them. At this time, Paris was recovering from the Franco-Prussian War, the Siege of Paris, and the Commune. Messages reported that meat and poultry were plentiful, and the flower markets were busy. The weather was fine, although a frost was promised. In the great cathedral of Notre Dame, flowers were profuse in decoration. In Berlin, fog and rain brought a thaw, and the forecast was for an extraordinarily mild Christmas. Game, meat, and poultry were remarkably expensive as demand outstripped supply. The churches were decorated with evergreens, and at the centre of all festivities was the Christmas tree, a relic of paganism. In certain parts of the German press, there were articles dismissing the Christian aspects of Christmas in favour of a change in society's appreciation and understanding of the ultimate truths underlying the Christmas message. After heavy rains and floods, Brussels looked set to have fine weather. Figures of baby Jesus made from wax were laid on straw in cribs and covered with flowers. In the houses of the upper classes, the Christmas tree was becoming fashionable, and little presents were given to children and guests. In Flemish towns, there was an old custom of children singing little hymns, called Noëls in French, in front of houses and then ringing the doorbell and asking for charity. That will never catch on in Britain. The weather in Rome had not been so pleasant as elsewhere, and the festivities were, at best, muted. Pope Pius IX was having a bad decade. His sovereignty over the Papal States had ended with the Italian Law of Guarantees the previous year, and he had excommunicated the king of the recently unified Italy, Victor Emmanuel II. As a result, no night services were allowed anywhere except behind closed doors, and Christmas was looking to be a dull affair. Ships arriving in Gibraltar brought news of storms and disasters. The officers and the crew of the steamer Otterburn arrived without their ship. Meanwhile, across the border in Spain, there was political unrest, the results of the Glorious Revolution of 1868 still working themselves out. Yet some degree of festive preparation was made in Gibraltar, and Christmas wishes were cabled to London. The Anglo-Maltese hydraulic dock was being built in Malta in this year, and the dock itself was due to be opened by Admiral Lord Clarence Paget in January. Meanwhile, the rest of the rock was cut. In the cathedral, a solemn midnight celebration was held, and a week later a grand ball was held by officers of the Royal Navy to celebrate the new year. There was news from Cairo of Sir Samuel Baker, the explorer and abolitionist, who was leading an expedition south along the Nile to suppress the slave trade. He had at this time run into resistance beyond Gongotaro. There was also news of Sir Bartlett Frere, who was leading the English slave trade mission to Zanzibar to negotiate a treaty with the Sultan designed to end the trafficking of slaves. Cairo itself was preparing to celebrate the marriages of the sons of the Khedive. From Bombay, or Mumbai as we call it today, the Anglo-Indian community sent a festive message. A Merry Christmas to all at home, with thanks in anticipation for the toasts which they know will be drunk tomorrow to absent friends. The news was that a newspaper called the Calcutta Englishman had published a statement that income tax was to be abolished, although few really believed it, and someone who had played a leading part in the Indian Mutiny had been arrested. In Singapore, there had been fighting in the streets between factions in the Chinese community, with future unrest likely. But a general holiday had been granted for the celebration of Christmas, and the British community sent home their festive wishes. The city of Adelaide sent Great Britain a Merry Christmas from the people of Australia, as well as the news of a magnificent harvest and the success of the Adelaide and Port Darwin land telegraph, otherwise known as the Australian Overland Telegraph Line. The legislature had voted a bonus of $1,000 to Charles Todd, the pioneer behind the telegraph line. Incidentally, the town of Alice Springs is named after his wife Alice. Finally, a greeting from San Francisco, and the news that over 3 million messages to the American press had been carried via telegraph wires in 1 year. How astonishing it must have seemed to the people of 1872 that they could read messages from across the world in their newspapers over breakfast on Christmas Eve, and learn of events thousands of miles away within days of those events happening. All around the world, there were small communities of telegraph workers sending home messages by way of submarine cables and overline wires, messages of goodwill and season's greetings. Aden, Saigon, Melbourne, Hong Kong, Lisbon, Algiers, all could speak to London and send a Merry Christmas to the people of Britain. In the same manner that the rise of the internet has shrunk the world of the 21st century to the point at which we can talk and see each other via, for example, Zoom, the technological progress must have astonished the Victorians. So to them, let's raise a glass and wish them and the world of today a Merry Christmas.